words for us. So let me introduce Mr. Eric Lewis.
Hi, my name's Eric Lewis. I am a member of the Blaine City Council, although my words are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of other council members or the city of Blaine. I was originally born in Iowa, but in 1968, when I was 5 years old, I, along with my parents and sister, moved to Calgary, a beautiful city in Alberta, Canada, nestled in the prairie, foothills, and eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. I went to school there from kindergarten all the way through high school, and in 1981 graduated from Sir Winston Churchill High School. As a child, I experienced all that any Canadian child would have experienced there and learned about the country of Canada and the world the same way any other Canadian child would. In those days, the United States seemed far away in many ways, but also very close. After all, the United States was still my native land, and I was still an American citizen. My other relatives were still there in Iowa, but my maternal grandmother moved to Montana to teach on a Hutterite colony near Cut Bank, Montana, and later moved to Kalispell, possibly to remain close to my family. Even though my life then was lived in Canada, we would at times visit our relatives in Iowa, and even more so, my grandmother in Montana. Crossing the border from Alberta to Montana became a common event for me, an exciting event. I always felt a rush of excitement just after we crossed the border at places in Montana called Bab, Del Bonita, and Sweetgrass. I could see the American flag and felt so proud to be among those who I considered to be from whom I had sprung. And if I was lucky, the people of my native land, the United States, would recognize me as one of their own. Americans to me were so vibrant, so colorful, such characters, full of a type of wisdom forged from decades of conflict, scientific endeavor, and the fight for civil rights. I was so proud to be an American, but Canada had become my home. In Canada, I acquired the culture of that great country as anyone would acquire theirs growing up in any other nation. In school, in my day-to-day life, and of course on television with the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I watched shows like Mr. Dress-Up, The Friendly Giant, and my favorite, The Beachcombers.
Yeah!
Yes, I learned to sing "Oh Canada" and get a thrill hearing the martial strains of the theme from Hockey Night in Canada. My team was the Montreal Canadiens, of course. And then later, the Calgary Flames, of course. I later attended the University of Calgary. The National Film Board of Canada was second to none in the production of illuminating and inspiring documentaries. I watched The Nature of Things, hosted by the great Canadian David Suzuki. And many, many other sources of wisdom and light that I learned in Canada about our world and the universe in which it resides. When I was older, I had almost joined the Canadian Armed Forces, but instead, in 1982, I returned to my native land and I joined the United States Marine Corps and I became an infantryman. I wanted to stand next to my fellow Americans on the front line, to be one of the first to fight for right and freedom, and I meant it. I was trained to shoot and to run and carry a pack on long marches. I was trained that retreating was not an option. And I was sent on a ship called the USS Guadalcanal. Named after a brutal battle that American Marines had engaged in during World War II in the Pacific. And I was sent with my fellow Marines on that ship to a faraway land called Lebanon, a once beautiful land of many religions and groups, a land that had become war-torn. On the way over on my ship, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that one of my Marines in my company was from my own hometown of Calgary, a lieutenant with the last name of Skagen. Our mission in Lebanon was to try to keep the peace in a land torn apart by civil war. We failed, and horrible things happened. I know what it is like to be in a civil war. Civil war, like any war, is not romantic. It is something to be avoided at all costs. Only a very few profiteers benefit from war. The vast majority suffer, some much, much worse than others. Today, decades later, I stand in a beautiful park in front of a majestic arch as a representative of a beautiful American city called Blaine. And I stand here today with my fellow Americans and my fellow Canadians. You are both my family, and we stand here today to ensure that we never forget that we are a common people with hopes and dreams for the future. To remember that we must honor other Native people like the Salish, who experienced horrible conflict between themselves and our ancestors, and continue to fight for dignity and respect for their hopes and dreams. Their land straddles this border. Historically, Canadians have stood beside Americans during many armed conflicts that we as a country have engaged in over many decades. An action that occurred during one of these conflicts was the Dieppe Raid in 1942 during World War II, an operation primarily manned by Canadian soldiers and was designed to test the defenses of the Atlantic Wall in France, erected by Nazi forces. The raid was a debacle and resulted in the loss of more than 900 Canadian soldiers, with almost 2,500 wounded, but made possible the successful landing at Normandy by Allied forces almost a year later that led to the eviction of the fascist regime from the continent of Europe. Recently, in Afghanistan, Canadian soldiers, men and women, stood beside American military forces during the conflict there. Regardless of what you feel about that conflict, Canada lost 159 of their citizens, with more than 2,000 wounded, because the United States was attacked. Those families who lost loved ones or have loved ones who were wounded in that conflict are on this day still suffering the effects of being our ally. Canada is our ally, our friend, our family. They must be treated with respect. We must hang our heads in shame and embarrassment as Americans if we allow a demagogue to get away with saying that Canada is nothing more than a 51st state of the United States. Allowing that speech to stand is beneath us as Americans. We as Americans are a people who I am proud of, as proud of as I was when I was a child living in Canada, looking south for guidance and recognition from my most excellent kinsmen in the United States. We as Americans are much better than that. I know this, and you do too. Thank you so much for showing up, because that's what Americans and Canadians do. We show up peacefully in a dignified fashion with wisdom and courage to be one of the first to fight for right and freedom. Thank you.